This is quite a crowd. Thank you so much for coming out. Thank you, Heather and Rachel and Christine and Jennifer, for putting this together. These are, multi-year process events, and I'm so excited that it's happening here in this beautiful space. So I thought that I would just share a bit about how my work has evolved that led to this work, and then specifically about this show of work. It's not easily apparent, but I make all of this work by drawing everything by hand. And so I've been drawing plants and trees by hand, but on the computer for 20 years. And so in 2004, everything was becoming digitized, music, photography, and I wondered what digital drawing might be. And there were some programs that imitated watercolor or paint, but I didn't want to imitate anything else. I wanted to use the computer just to hold this visual information of my hand making a simple drawing. And that's what computers could do really easily, is like, instead of drawing, writing a novel on yellow pieces of paper, you could type it in Microsoft Word and hold a whole novel, in a very small space. So I wondered, could I draw a tree by tracing every leaf by hand on the computer, and the computer could hold all the information, and then I could print it out at any scale or any color. It was interesting from the start that drawing on the computer was different on paper, because as I said, I could zoom in and zoom out, I could make layers of things, and it wasn't physical until I printed it. Kind of like a photograph isn't a physical thing. You expose the light on the film, but it doesn't become an object until you print it. The first drawings looked very different than these. They were simply white lines on a dark background, because I just wanted to highlight what my hand was doing. And they were printed as photographs, a photographic process. And they were presented as individual objects, like one tree. So like this tree or this tree, just a fun fact, this tree and this tree is the same tree, just at different times of the year. And this tree is in our backyard, actually. And this is in the spring, and that's in the summer. But so I tend to work from photographs, and I take a picture of a tree, and I use my hand to draw around every part. And I think of it as a way of honoring that moment of looking at a living thing, recording it, and creating this artifact of my experience with an object. So through the years, I've made drawings of all these individual things, of this hydrangea bush, echinacea flowers. There was this whole series of work about the Rose Parade in Pasadena, and the backgrounds of these paintings come from those drawings of the Rose Parade in Pasadena. But so what we end up with here is this encyclopedia of all this time of looking and drawing in these individual documents. So what at first started as the individual objects, I knew that I wanted to create a world out of all these individual things. And it wasn't until a show I had in 2020, which was the first show like this work, that I had this vision of the floating world. Floating world comes from this Japanese term called ukiyo. And ukiyo literally means floating world. And it was this wood block printing process. I think a big point of this body of work in Japan was to create this world that's a part of our world, but also separate from our world. That's what I've done. I've recorded all these parts from our world, and there's this virtual parallel world that's sort of inferred by everything that I have done. And what's exciting to me now is that the world is telling me what it wants to be. These figures came about because I was making all these intricate patterns, and I saw when people would look at my work, they would create this eclipse of all this complicated information. And the person becomes sort of the absence of the landscape. And so when I was putting this show together, I purposely wanted to have it mostly be this landscaped world, but it was occupied by someone. And who are these people? And about 3 or 4 years ago, I started to collect figures from all sorts of sources. So these portraits, these smaller portraits, what I like about them is that they conflate people from present day, from art history, from Western culture, Eastern cultures, that I'm just collecting figures, and the paper becomes the common denominator of all of those different people and time. So in these examples, there are actually multiple portraits that are superimposed together, literally by gluing the paper, one portrait on top of the other, with the landscapes that make these as everything that they're not. I like that the figures are animating these landscapes in this kind of non-linear time frame. It could be from any time or multiple times, like these two trees. I purposely want to make something that's ambiguous in terms of when it was made, who made it, and what it depicts. Does anybody have a?
I have a question.
Yeah.
You used a very interesting word, 2 words, virtual. You didn't say dimension, you said word or
Virtual world?
And is there?
You know, art is an odd endeavor in which I think of art as humans' fumbling way of imitating nature, of bringing things into the world, of creating life. Humans can't create life, but artists, I think, imitate bringing things into the world. I'm lucky enough to have my family here, and you know, having kids, you realize that you don't do that. You don't do that. You sort of get out of the way for that to happen in a way. And but I do like this idea that you know, and it ties into art, that there's this whole history, this whole trail of objects of human experience, and I love that you could look at something thousands of years old and there's not that much difference in human experience from that time. And I think that we emphasize, you know, how different everyone is and how different every culture is. And but I think that this humanness is a really interesting thing to explore. And I think as long as we're still, you know, about this far off the ground, 2 eyes, 2 ears, that we experience things in pretty much the same way as people did thousands of years ago. And I'm purposely trying to make things that you need to stand in front of, that they're very hard to understand on a screen, and that it's actually the relation between our physical body walking up, and instead of zooming in, zooming out, walking towards and walking away, that one needs to physically do that to understand. Yeah.
Would you say these 2 are a diptych?
Yeah, I think of them as a diptych. Like once I have a whole body of work up, I tend to like look at what focuses and concentrates what I'm interested in versus what maybe distracts. And I really like this idea of perhaps making these individual things that connect, and they could stand alone, or they could keep going and making a whole wall of things. Because I like highlighting the fact that these are sort of squares, these are sections out of this world that could keep going. And I like this balance of this frame, which highlights the border. There's things that bleed across the frame, and then there's things that connect. And so I think of this as a diptych, but I think it could keep going, kind of like, yeah, an endless column, like Brancusi's endless column. Yeah.
Actually, yeah, speaking of the frames,
Mm-hmm.
like I see that each of them does have like its own frame. What inspired that, or like why
Yeah.
did you do that like that?
So I think a lot of people don't understand that artists don't know what the work is going to look like until they make it. You know, like artists don't preconceive things completely, that they actually have an idea, and it's making the work that teaches them what it should be or what it should look like. And so the first show I had, I just, actually the horse and rider back there was from the first show I had. And so in that show, I had some of the world go all the way off, full bleed around all sides. I had a few with this border. I had some like that rider partially goes off, just to see what it looked like, in the variation. And the border I really liked the most because I could do both. I could have it come off in places, but highlight that this is just a square out of a bigger world.
What is mulberry paper?
So mulberry paper is, it's a traditional Japanese printmaking paper made from the bark of a mulberry tree. There's no white in the printmaking process. The white is the paper. The subject is actually the space around everything. There's this really famous, this Japanese screen. Really the subject is this mist that is enveloping all those pine trees and the mountain. And the mist is the paper. That's the idea here, is that the paper is the world. And these things are just in that world. But the paper is like the beginning and the end of all of these things. And so I wanted the paper to be very tangible and physical and made from plants, versus synthetic. Yeah. My family and I went to Japan, and I saw that in a lot of this Japanese work, there's no light and shadow, and my work doesn't have light and shadow. The light and the dark was created by the spare or density of information. But the first work was very muted, and then I tend to then say, well, what's the opposite of that? And I made things very vibrant, and this is like a mix. But I purposely wanted the color to be within the realm of things that could have been made at any time. So there's not like day glow colors and things like that, yeah.
Are you still drawing new images?
Yeah. So so this hydrangea actually was really new. So and I have this idea of making like a whole wall of the hydrangeas, but I didn't end up doing that for this. But I keep finding things, and that's what's fun. Also, I never was able to keep a sketchbook when I was like in college and things like that. And the iPhone became sort of the first thing that I really could use to compile things, and I keep lists of ideas and words, titles, and now pictures. And now the phone is so good I can draw from those pictures. But so I'm always taking pictures of things, and also last few years in museums of figures and things like that. So I have a whole stockpile of things that I want to draw. The drawing is the most laborious part, and it's the hardest part. But I do a lot of things that I just sort of have to. I listen to podcasts, and it's like knitting. I just like have to devote that time. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Talk about your relationship with nature. Has that always been your artistic inspiration, or?
I've learned a lot about my relationship of nature by drawing it. I've learned a lot about getting older, like moving through time by drawing natural things. But I just think that I always sort of crave, I use the phrase like have a foot in the deep end of the pool, like something beyond human-made things. That we as humans place ourselves in the center of everything. Even, how Copernicus said the sun is the center of the solar system, not the earth. And that was like this, But that we still, AI or anything, we think that we are the end product of all of these things. But I actually think nature, like we are a product of nature, and we are doing nature's bidding, and we are networking for nature, that more and more of our world is made. Like more of our experience is the product of other people. And it makes me want to always have a foot outside of that, because I think that that's where true wisdom comes from. So, yeah. All right, do you think we should wrap up, Heather?
Great.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. And feel free to come up to me, ask me anything. Really appreciate you all coming here. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much.